Making indie games is everything to you. Your life revolves around making sure that you give yourself as much free time as possible to work on your game. And if you're not a full-time dev, then your #1 goal in life is to make sure that you become a full-time developer. And now you're working on your first game, or you're thinking about it. It is the greatest job in the entire world, and yet most people never start. And those that do start, most end up quitting. And most developers that don't quit end up battling with things like anxiety, insomnia, massive levels of stress, and if they do it long enough, burnout. Why does the greatest job in the entire world takes such an emotional toll on people? There's a very simple reason for this, and my hope is that this video is going to help save you time and money and a little bit of stress as well. I'm Brandon, my wife Nikki and I make videos about all things game dev, and we hope you enjoy the video. So on the surface, it's like, why? It makes no sense. If game dev is the greatest job in the entire world, then why does it take such a toll on the people who actually stick with it? And I think it's because you expect too much of yourself. The expectations that you put on your shoulders, it's going to keep you up at night, it's going to ruin the fun of the game dev process, and if left unchecked, it's going to burn you out. And I promise you, it does not need to be this way. We're going to talk about that. So there tend to be 3 categories of expectations that indie devs put on themselves that ends up causing them pain. Number 1 is time. You're expecting too much too fast. I have personally found that trying to get certain mechanics or certain to-do items on my list done by a certain day has been really detrimental to my mental health. As soon as you miss a deadline, and you will when you're doing indie game dev because things just crop up that you're not expecting, it starts to snowball really fast. What starts as one tiny little failure in your first week ends up becoming 4 really big failures in your first month, and you just multiply that forward and all you're feeling on a constant basis is failure. And the thing is, for a lot of you, you're probably making some really big sacrifices to be able to make time to work on your game. Even if it's just using your free time to work on your game, that is a big sacrifice. You're sacrificing your free time. You might be sacrificing a bit of your social life. You might be sacrificing time with your family or doing things that you really enjoy. You might be sacrificing time for chores or other responsibilities. If you do any of those things, then these things tend to pile up. So the combination of all of these personal sacrifices, as well as all of these things starting to pile up in your personal life, and over here you've got game dev, which you constantly feel like you're falling behind on. That constant state of failure in both sides of your life can really wear you down really quickly. That is just going to grate your motivation away from you slowly but surely. Now, all the while you're doing this, you're going to have this little voice in the back of your head that's telling you that you need to slow down because it knows that what you're doing is not sustainable. But if you're stubborn, you're not going to listen and you're going to keep trudging ahead anyways, because you have to stick to your deadlines, right? You might tell yourself that is what real game dev studios try to do, so you're going to try to do it too. And maybe you implement crunch time. And if you can just squeeze enough hours into working on your game, then you're going to get caught up and everything's going to be good. I'm obviously very familiar with all of this, and I promise it will ruin the game dev experience for you. And we're going to talk about solutions in just a minute. But the second category is expecting yourself to do everything. What are the fundamentals of game dev in order for you to actually build a proper game? Programming, art and animation, sound, music, testing and feedback, and marketing. And that's just like at the super basic high level. It can be really easy to forget that each one of those things could very easily be a full-time job in and of itself. And they are in AAA and AA game studios, and in some indie studios as well. And in a AAA studio, each one of those categories would have a team lead with probably dozens of employees underneath them. But for whatever reason, as indie devs, we tend to take it all on ourselves. If you try to do all of these things yourself without any help, it's just very likely that you will not do as well, or you'll tend to prioritize some areas more than others, but they're all equally important. A lot of the time, trying to do everything yourself will actually put you further behind someone who is willing to accept help from other people. Every successful person that I have ever met or read about has been willing to accept help from other people, or at least been willing to take advice from people that know better than they do. And look at Team Cherry, the creators of Hollow Knight. If you don't know their development history, they actually had to accept help from a friend of theirs when they transitioned into the Unity game engine, because they weren't familiar with it, they didn't know how to use it, and they didn't know how to code. They hired a composer to make their music for them. They hired a PR specialist for marketing. Now, Team Cherry had animation and game design down. They had those skills, but they hired the best people they could find to flesh out the areas in their studio where they felt they were weak. And the third thing is expecting your game to be received well from everybody. I really get it. This is your game, it's your baby, it's an expressive form of art to you, and people shitting all over it really sucks. But 1 or 2 pieces of negative feedback does not necessarily mean that your game sucks. Pick a game. Doesn't matter whether it's indie or whether it's AAA, pick your favorite game of all time. Even if it's a 10 out of 10 on Steam or 100 on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. Whatever that game that you're thinking of is, there are thousands of people that hated it and probably hundreds of negative comments. This is just how it is. And you get to ultimately decide whether the feedback that you receive is worth taking and changing something in your game or not because of it. But if you decide to change something every single time you get a piece of negative feedback, you probably will never finish your game. So all these expectations we've been talking about, they can obviously be a very big problem for us as creators. So what can you do about them? What I would say is control only what you can control. What does that mean? It means, first and foremost, do your due diligence. Do your very best to plan everything out to make sure that this game is as good as it can possibly be, and that the launch goes as well as it possibly can. That's your first job, and I should mention it's actually an ongoing job because things are going to need to change and update throughout the process. You're probably going to have to adapt a lot, but your next job is to sit down and follow that plan to the best of your ability by sitting down, doing the work, and putting time out of your mind as much as possible. Try to forget about I need to implement this thing today. There is a good chance that sometimes things are going to come up and you're not going to be able to finish that thing you wanted to finish. If you say you're going to work for an hour today, then work for an hour today. That's the best you can do. But this is the real key. Do your best work and try to enjoy doing the work. Forget about time and forget about accomplishments. If you are worried about time, every single time you get an error in your code, you are going to want to smash your computer. You cannot work that way sustainably. It's too much pressure. It's too much stress. If you have to budget your time for when you're going to get this game out, and sometimes you will have to do that, then give yourself a lot of extra room in your time budget to finish the things that you're going to finish. Professional developers that have been doing this for a really long time might have a good idea in terms of how long certain things will take them, but to those of us who are still learning, we don't always know how long things are going to take. So trying to budget how long a certain mechanic should take can end up backfiring a lot of the time. This isn't something that you want to rush. Rushed art is sloppy, and this is something that all of us want to do full time because we enjoy it so much. Next, I would say hire out when possible, even if it's someone cheap on Fiverr or something. Or another example, instead of spending 1 or 2 months coding your own pathfinding system, why not spend 40 or 50 bucks and buy your own from the asset store? If your goal is to finish and ship your game as quickly as possible, spending time reinventing the wheel on every little thing isn't really in your best interest. If your goal is to make something like that from scratch and you're doing it just for fun, then that's a totally different story. But again, if getting into game dev full time is something that you're shooting for, then making absolutely everything yourself doesn't really make sense because it's slowing you down. For feedback, this is just a tough part of the process. We need feedback for our games. It's hard to take critical feedback, but it is something that we need in order to improve them. Your game will probably suck if you don't get any feedback on it. It very much does sting, and the only thing to really help with that is to just get some experience with it. The more you get used to receiving critical feedback, the less it hurts. So you could join a few Discord servers and share some stuff. Ask for feedback, be ready for a couple of blows. Releasing your expectations and letting go of how long something should take, letting yourself get help, and allowing yourself to experience feedback on a regular basis. Doing those things is really going to help make this game dev journey more sustainable and more enjoyable for you in the long run. We have lost too many amazing devs from burnout and stress and expectations. I actually have a whole other video dedicated to preventing burnout right here. Like the video if you liked, subscribe if you want more content like this, and bye.